At least 14 Trump allies joined him in court today, the latest wave of surrogates to come to New York City in the former president's defense.
Outside of the courthouse, they went after the judge, they went after the prosecutors, and they went after the witnesses because they are not bound by the same rules that a gag order has bound Donald Trump, which, by the way, he's already violated 10 times. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is outside of the courthouse for us. Brendan Buck is the former senior aide to then Speaker John Boehner, and Paul Ryan, an MSNBC political analyst as well. Chuck, Catherine, and Duncan are still here with us. Vaughn, bring us to the scene outside and all these surrogates. Yesterday, they all showed up wearing the same outfit. Was it today as well?
No, Troy Neill, one of the congressmen, he actually had a tie of Donald Trump holding and hugging an American flag. So there was a little differentiation today in terms of the wardrobe. I tried to ask the congressman what led to the decision for that tie, but I got no response. I also attempted to ask multiple times about the decision for Donald Trump not to testify, though, because it was Donald Trump himself who had repeatedly suggested that he would, in fact, take the stand and tell his truth to this jury. But ultimately, when the opportunity was presented to him today, the defense rested its case and chose for him not to take the stand. And you heard from these litany of allies here, just a few feet from where we're standing, repeatedly say that this is a sham prosecution and that, constantly going at that the facts of the case are not true, this and that. And I tried to follow up with that question. Well, Donald Trump had the opportunity to share his version of the story with the jury, and he chose not to. Don Jr. finally began to answer part of that, in which he said, why would you justify this insanity? Look at the clowns that they put on there. You don't subject yourself to that nonsense. You're going into a kangaroo court. There's nothing more, nothing less. There'd be absolutely no reason, no justification to do that whatsoever. The words of Donald Trump's own son as to why he would not testify, essentially making the case that he would not justify these proceedings in their entirety by choosing to go that route.
Brendan, is this where we are? Is this, look, I guess we can say that the Trump campaign insists it's not coordinating this show of force by Republicans, but then you have Donald Trump, who is basically saying that these are his surrogates for when he's on trial, and NBC reporting from somebody who has been in that courthouse. And when I was there yesterday, a lot of reporters were talking about this. The coordination and organization between Trump and those supporters has stoked questions about whether the remarks by the cast of Republicans amount to a violation of Trump's gag order. What do you see is going on here?
Yeah, it sure feels coordinated, and I'll leave it to our legal experts on whether it violates the gag order. But it is clearly an effort to counter what potential news may come next if there is a conviction. And it's all about that information flow to those voters who live in that bubble, the conservative media bubble. They want to make sure that whatever happens, this is seen as unfair, unjust, and that it's not going to damage him. Remember, the Trump campaign's strategy is not about winning over the middle. It is all about turning out Republicans. And so it's not a new tactic for Donald Trump. His entire political campaign has been, or career has been, about creating his own reality. And so now he's sending out people to create their own reality of what's happening in here. And so even if he is found guilty, it will have limited impact. And I hate to say it, it does feel like one of those situations where with a large majority of this country, and certainly his supporters, they're going to shrug if he is found guilty here, and in part because they're going to be pounding the information into people's heads like they are day after day up here.
Is it just because, Brendan, they've been inoculated to Trump's antics now for 9 years that it just doesn't weigh on them the way that it might have early on, or maybe if the Russia investigation turned out differently? The number of people who are paying close attention to this trial hovers around 16%, according to a Yahoo News YouGov poll. That's not a big number of people. And this is the first criminal trial of a former president ever in history. And if you had talked about this, in the lead up a year ago, if you had guessed what this would be like, or 5 years ago what this would be like, you would have imagined an insanely large scene, an insane attention surrounding this, more akin to, the OJ case in the 90s. But this is not getting that same amount of attention from the American public. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's two things. One, for his supporters, it's been a years and years long effort to undermine any attacks against him and to say that they're all unfair and that they're all political, out to get him. I think the other half is most people probably just appreciate that he probably did a lot of this stuff. There's this sense that a lot of Republican voters in particular just don't quite get that Donald Trump is a bad guy. I think there's a lot of people who support Donald Trump who will acknowledge that he's not a good guy. And they see it and say, well, yeah, he probably did do this. I'm going to support him for other reasons. And then, of course, a lot of the people who don't like him certainly think that this is the type of activity that he would be involved with. So it's like we already sort of know this about him. We're not learning a lot new. And for that reason, it's not as explosive as it might otherwise be.
So I want to read a little bit more because the reporting from NBC News, and I know that this story's been worked on for a number of days, is this. When asked, his supporters have said they joined Trump in court of their own volition, not at his direction, but they aren't arriving on their own, standing in line and entering through the public entrance. Several have been seen or acknowledged traveling with Trump to the courthouse and remaining part of the security bubble. The Secret Service remains around him. There actually have been some complaints amid some of this reporting from people who got there days before, slept on park benches nearby, waiting in line, that these folks just come in with Donald Trump. But that aside, whether or not those folks are unhappy about that, what is really going on here? How much of this do you think, Brendan, is an audition?
Look, for however many there are there today, I promise you there are dozens more who would like to be there today. I am sure that they are all asking the Trump campaign if they can come up here. I'm just struck at it for these members of Congress. This is not part of your day job. You can't use your office budget finances to fly you up to New York for this. They're all using their own campaign dollars to go up there. Yeah, I'm sure all of these people see themselves as future cabinet secretaries or having some type of official role, or at least avoiding a primary, having that Donald Trump seal of approval. We're in an era of entertainment politics. These people would much rather be shouting at cameras outside of a courtroom in New York than in a committee hearing. And that's unfortunately sort of the prevailing view of members here. They could go on like this for months and you would have these people rushing to stand up there every single day.